doing to try a little bit of work we're trying to prevent RFI before it even happens. If we have time, I will end with a horrible joke that will leave you all laughing, and at that point you'll think I'm a great speaker. So I have some rules though. Everybody needs to laugh at my jokes. Now that'll be a little hard not being in person, but if I say something funny, I do expect you to laugh. But I was up at the club a couple of years ago, and that unfortunate incident, I had a new rule. I'm the only one allowed to tell any jokes. So taking pictures, not a risk. We're here remote. Save questions for the end. It'll be a little too impractical to try. And falling asleep, it's okay. Especially those of you I can see here on the screen. Do me a favor. If I'm doing a good job, fall asleep with your head tipped forward. If I'm doing a bad job, tip your head back. And if you have a question, tip your head to either side. Now, I do a lot of these presentations, and unfortunately, sometimes they get a little dry. So I was off one point, and somebody actually got a picture of this. I'm up there droning on, and suddenly I heard this strange sound coming from the front of the room. Apparently, I put myself to sleep. So, at any rate, a little bit about me, Ed Hare, W1RFI. That stands for Really Fine Individual. When I post on QRZ or some of the others, it's real flaming idiot and the way they really say it. I've been licensed in 63, and I'm lucky. I don't know where to draw the line between my personal interest in amateur radio and my professional obligation to my employer. I mean, that's really a nice place to be. As of April this year, I am planning on stepping down as lab dad, but I'm going to continue to work with ARRL quite a bit, doing a lot of volunteer work. Going to continue to represent the league to the IEEE and some of those other places. So now I'm famous for QRP. I also love CW. And my CW motto is when I'm mobile, 45 words a minute at 55 miles an hour, but I'm lying about one of the two of them. So little tiny bit about the lab. We have an extensive screen room full of test equipment where we'll put a lot of rigs through their paces. This is an older shot of it. Some of this equipment is a little obsolete. I do need to replace the photo, but when we get a rig in for product review testing, it might take us a week to 10 days of testing in that room. So we put these radios through quite a bit of spectrum, quite a bit of scrutiny. So radio spectrum. It's a natural resource. And one thing I noticed a few years back, and this means a lot to me personally, is I realized radio spectrum is a natural resource. And the work I get to do for ARRL, working with industry, working with FCC, IEEE, international standardization, I'm literally protecting radio spectrum and having an impact on a global basis. I think that's pretty cool. Now, the thing we know about spectrum, it can be used for personal enjoyment, valuable commercially, broadcasting, police, fire, a lot of things that are pretty important. But we know as hams, it can be seriously degraded or rendered useless by noise pollution. I can't see much in the room here, but I'll often ask the question about how many people have had interference, and most of the hands go up. There are literally hundreds of thousands of noise sources in today's technological world. I saw an ad recently for a computer-controlled outlet strip, and I looked at that and said to myself, "Wow, now I can get interference from my neighbor's extension cord." So there's a lot of noisy devices out there. Almost everything we buy now has a switching power supply. They're potential sources of noise. They're pretty bad. I'll tell you a little story recently is I had an arc fault circuit interrupter on one of the outlets in my house, and it kept tripping for no reason at all. I couldn't figure it out. There was no arcs. There was nothing wrong. I finally decided to do a little troubleshooting, and I unplugged everything from the line except for my computer, and the tripping went away. Well, what I found is a little small wall wart that I was using to charge my GPS unit. I left it plugged in all the time. It was generating 45 dB of excess noise. That's a lot. So, any one of these devices in my house, neighbor's house, can certainly cause us interference. The good news about noise is once you identify the noise source and remove it, that spectrum, unlike water pollution or air pollution, instantly returns to its natural, pristine condition. uh, condition. The flip side of that is once a noisy device is deployed out there, it might be around for years. So we really got to do a lot and everything we can to try to eliminate these noise problems at the source. Okay, I can't do the survey because I can't see the hands, but I think we can ask the question in general, how many people are impacted by noise? How many people think that noise levels are rising? Well, what I say to those who don't raise their hand is get on the air because any one of us who are active as hams, especially on HF, we know that the noise is out there. We know instinctively it's getting worse with time. But then I'll ask, okay, how many of you reported your noise problem to the ARL? All the hands go down, or most of them. How many reported to the FCC? Most of the hands stay down. And so without these reports, FCC and manufacturers think there is no noise problem. They say we deploy devices, we don't get any complaints. And I think amateurs need to do a better job at trying to get that out before the manufacturers and the regulators. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can do that through the ARRL. Okay, everything that's out there makes noise, from switching power supplies, power line noise, battery chargers, grow lights. In fact, that's literally a growing problem. And we can't cover every single possible noise source here. I once put together an 8-hour course that even then only touched the surface of RFI. But we know that there's stuff out there causing us interference. Okay, this chart's a little hard to see. I'm sure it's a bit of an eye test there in the room because the lines need to be strengthened up a little bit. But this shows you the expected or median levels of man-made noise. And hopefully you can see my little cursor on the screen here. But say on 7 megahertz, the typical value of man-made noise in a residential environment, this yellow line represents S6. So on 7 megahertz in typical areas, an S6 noise level is not that uncommon. This is important because I'll talk a little bit about in a little bit about harmful interference, the FCC's view on it, and if the FCC were to ever set a level that represents harmful interference, they'd say, well, S6 on 7 megahertz, if it's lower than that, we're not going to do anything. These are important things to consider. The questions are whether this is growing or decreasing with time, and some of the studies being done at the ITU level and by some of the sister societies are showing that on the lower part of HF, noise is rising. On the upper part of HF, surprisingly, it's not. Well, look, aren't there rules against causing interference? I mean, the FCC ought to like be taking care of all of these problems for us. Well, no, they don't. The FCC does not test most devices. Most of them are brought up under a supplier's declaration of conformity, which means the manufacturer is expected to have tested the design and keep records on file in the very unlikely event the FCC asks for them. Well, Part 15 rules and Part 18 rules govern unlicensed devices such as computers, fluorescent lights, and a lot of other things. And the FCC does set emissions limits and requirements um, for them, including a requirement to address harmful interference. While there are incidental emitters like power lines, motors, unintentional emitters like computers that intentionally generate RF inside but don't intentionally radiate it. Well, the commission sets conducted emissions limits onto the AC mains below 30 megahertz. So the computer power supply that's connected to my computer here has to have a limit on how much noise it can put onto the AC mains. They don't set limits below 30 megahertz for radiated emissions. So that computer could radiate as much as it wants, except for the fact that it can't cause harmful interference. There are radiated limits above 30 megahertz. Most devices we've tested have actually met these, but there's some limits to this. A physically large device, say a solar system, has a lot of noise it's putting off on the wires between that inverter and the panels up on the roof. They can and do radiate, and there's no specific FCC limits about that. Well, what's the manufacturer required to do? Well, they have to meet those limits and use good engineering practice, whatever that means. It's the operator of a device that needs to use it in a way that doesn't cause harmful interference. So if your neighbor goes off and buys a battery charger and it meets the limits and your antenna is close to your neighbor's house, you might actually have interference. The rules require the neighbor to address the interference, not a conversation most hams want to have with their neighbors. Okay, well, I kept saying harmful interference. What is this? The FCC has a definition. Any emission, radiation, or induction that endangers the function of a radio navigation service or other safety services, or, and this is the part that applies to us, seriously degrades, obstructs, or repeatedly interrupts a radio communication service operating in accordance with this chapter. What that basically means is the FCC will say, look, if you had a few seconds of interference from a device that's transitory, that's not seriously disrupting you. If you have S9 noise continuously, it is. And we have avoided asking the FCC to ever draw that line in the sand, because as I said earlier, if they did, that would be S6, and to many amateurs, S6 noise would be pretty degrading if somebody has intentionally selected a very quiet location. We'd much rather have this addressed as it is by the FCC on a case-by-case basis. Well, harmful interference is the key. I mean, S9 noise on entire bands, no doubt. What about that single birdie from your neighbor's computer system that's on one frequency that you don't really need to use? You have frequency agility, you can move around. I had a neighbor who turned on an outside sodium light that made noise for about 30 seconds. I don't think the commission would find that actionable. I can hear birdies from my neighbor's computer systems, S5, S6. I have a pretty quiet location. And ultimately, it's going to be the FCC that will determine whether something is harmful interference. Fortunately, they take a lot of advice from us on that. We're working very closely with Laura Smith. Now, in marginal cases where it's a little bit iffy as it's interference, we've gotten the FCC to send letters sometimes to the operator of a device if we can identify the device and we can convince the FCC that the interference could be fixed. We've seen other cases where the definition of harmful interference can be made for what I'll call bureaucratic convenience. And once the FCC makes a decision about whether this is harmful interference, it's almost impossible to get them to back away from that. We try to resolve problems locally. We can go to the FCC, but we'll work very hard working with the amateur, the neighbor, a utility, because as I like to put it, local solutions to local problems are best. Well, look, Ed, if there's rules, why do I still have interference? Well, these limits in our rules are similar to other countries, the European Union, for example, but they are not intended to prevent all interference. Typically a quote legal device in the house next door might be S7 noise to a nearby amateur. Obviously, those rules are not going to prevent interference. What they do is they limit the geographical area over which interference is possible. So if I have a problem with interference, I can be pretty sure it's coming from a neighboring house or my own, not something 2 or 3 miles away. It also cuts down the number of problems to the point where manufacturers, utilities, and affected radio operators can deal with them on a case-by-case basis. So, the rules are a good start. They help, but ultimately we often come down to harmful interference. Well, what are the rules? Well, licensed transmitters, we know we need to meet spurious emissions or harmonic limits. Well, these devices must meet those Part 15 or Part 18 FCC rules. Manufacturer must not exceed the emissions limits. The operator of that device is responsible for harmful interference. Well, I'll tell you right now, those of you who've had to deal with a neighbor who has a device that's causing interference, they generally won't understand. These devices, okay, I'm sorry. Well, okay, what's the worst problem we have? I think right now there's no doubt, based upon our case records, power line noise, interference from things like defective insulators, many things up on that power structure can cause interference. At best, these cases can take months to resolve. By the time you're dealing with a large utility, you have to get a complaint through their customer call center. uh, get them to understand that they're supposed to do something about it, out to a service center, out to a truck roll that goes out to investigate the complaint. Possibly they have an RFI troubleshooter. This takes time. In most cases, these power companies, even the best ones, their RFI troubleshooters don't do it full time. They have a real job at the power company. The boss said, hey, you're a ham. You're now our RFI investigator. Go out and solve these. And then, of course, I'll call the big ugly lineman syndrome, where the RFI investigator goes out, finds a problem, the big ugly lineman comes out, climbs the pole, says, oh, just a cracked insulator. I've seen them work like that for years, marks it closed, and goes away. So, these can be very, very interesting. And that's for the power companies that know what they're doing. A lot of times they don't. Now, we do work closely with the FCC on a lot of this. They are really good at the early stages in terms of writing letters to power companies, to neighbors operating devices. When we come out to actual enforcement and field investigations, and I'll share a little bit of that in a few minutes, it's, I would call, inconsistent. Success. Well, look, we've had tremendous successes and tremendous failures. In one case, the FCC came out and identified, a power company that had some, I don't know, 64 noise sources they found, and the FCC demanded that that power company fix them all. That's great. That's the kind of stuff we'd love to see. Other cases have dragged on to years. In one case, FCC came out, did an investigation, found S9 noise. They were unable to locate the source, so they said, well, it's not harmful interference because you can still hear a few signals. Now, I share this and I'll add something that you'll find shocking. Those two were the same case, two different FCC field investigators. So what happens once we get past that initial letter writing can really be a challenge to get it right. And as I said, once that agent comes out and makes a determination, we've got to come back with better stuff. The FCC will listen, but it can be quite the challenge. Well, a lot of people complain about the utilities. What we've noticed is, for the most part, they are not competent to find power line noise. They need information, they need help. We don't see this with the cable industry because they have requirements to measure leakage on a biannual basis and fix leakage when it occurs. Power companies, well, they used to do better when we had a lot of over the air television. That doesn't exist anymore. Even over the air AM broadcast is a waning service as it is. And so these power companies are just not skilled. This picture shows you some of the equipment that can be used. This is an ultrasonic dish that can be used to identify noise on a pole. That's Mike Gruber, who was our RFI engineer at the time. That's Laura Smith. Mike is showing her how it works, and she was looking on in sheer fascination. Well, what do? We work with the FCC, but it's really a multi-stage process. This applies mostly to noise from utilities, consumer devices, anything that might impact amateur radio. We've actually got the FCC now willing and able to at least initiate some action to try to help it resolve. Well, the first thing we try to do is, somebody has a problem, we try to give them information and say, well, try to work with your neighbor, work with the utility. If that doesn't work, we'll get involved. We will often write a letter to a utility, write a letter to the neighbor, say, look, we know you have a problem. The amateurs identified this pole. If you need some advice from us, we'll work with you even on the phone, trying to help you resolve this, because we'd rather get these cases fixed than punish bad guys. They're not really bad guys. They just don't know how to find it. Well, if all this fails, we turn this over to the FCC. At that point, we have a well-documented case where the correct source has been identified. It's been identified as harmful interference. We know we can document that we've tried to work it out with the people who aren't being cooperative. And then the FCC will then contact that utility or neighbor, writing basically an advisory letter. Unfortunately, it's a slow process. FCC gives that utility, they say basically, well, we expect the utilities can usually resolve these within 30 days of the time first reported to the utility. So we've had a few amateurs becoming a little bit impatient. Well, what else is out there? Well, there are hundreds of thousands of noisy devices. Zach Lau in our lab one day went on to Walmart.com. This was a few years back. He identified 50,000 electronic products being sold by Walmart. Well, I can tell you right now, we can't measure them all. There's no way in the world we can go out and buy one of everything and find out which ones are noisy, which ones are quiet. We really need reports. But the number of times I'll get a report that'll say, "Oh yeah, Ed, my neighbor bought these LED lights. The interference was horrible. I went off and bought him some new LED lights, and we threw the old ones away." Well, what were they? I don't know. I don't even know where he got them. Well, we can't do much with that. So when we can get specific reports, we'll go out, we'll buy some of these things, we'll measure them, and we often find out that these things exceed the FCC's limits, which is a actionable situation in and of itself. I went off and bought a battery charger at Harbor Freight that we measured, I don't know, about 50 dB over the FCC limits. I'll put that in perspective. That one battery charger was making as much noise as 100,000 legal devices. That got my attention. You know, I'm a ham. I know what 50 dB is, but when I realized that's a factor of 100,000, one device can really cause a lot of devastation. Um, and so, you know, we'll go buy them, we test them, we have a whole program to do it. Now, one of the most exciting cases is we found a high-powered lighting controller that was off on the West Coast. It was apparently being used for some form of indoor gardening. It could have been orchids, we don't know, but we bought this one, and this one was 58 dB over the limits. Now, well, what's 58 dB among friends? This shows you a graph of the measurements we made. Right there is the peak somewhere, I don't know, probably down around 3, 4 megahertz. So this thing was wiping out 80 meters. It could be heard from a mile away. Well, apparently we sent out a consultant to look at this, and let's just say he spoke the same language as the farmer. So he went up and knocked on the door. And he said, "Hey, I know what you're doing because we can measure radio noise out there that has a clear signature. You're using an indoor lighting controller for some form of indoor gardening." Well, you know, we didn't want to go after a farmer and get him in trouble. So Jerry, the consultant, he made a deal with a farmer. He sent us the device with the understanding that if it didn't meet the limits, we'd go off and buy one locally. That would be our complaint. And sure enough, we found this thing was about the worst we've ever measured in the lab. Ultimately, the neighbor went off. The neighbor was like a mile from the ham. He went off and bought a different controller that was much, much quieter. We ran a story on it on the web page, and but the key is FCC enforcement. We reported it to the FCC with tests and everything else, and the FCC said absolutely not a word. Never heard back from them. Fortunately, we got on. Well, let's just say one of the guys in the lab, he got on some of the list for growing orchids and posted that these things have clearly identifiable radio noise signatures that can be heard as much as a mile away. And of course, a little research, we discovered some crops during the growing season want 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And then when you're getting ready to harvest, you want 16 hours on, 8 hours off. When you're getting ready to harvest, you want 12-hour cycles. So not only do you know what's growing in the house, you know when it's ready to harvest. Well, even in areas where they don't fear law enforcement, they're worried about people going in and stealing their orchids. So the importer of this responded, identified some filters that could be used to quiet it down. And so ultimately we got that straightened out. Solar power. This is another problem that I think we're starting to see more and more. We're getting complaints. There's one or two companies. Well, solar power is mandated for new homes in California. Big solar farms are cropping up everywhere. I mean, I can drive down almost any major road and see the solar farms off on the side. The good news is we've gone off and looked at about half a dozen of them. They seem to be clean. One of the guys in the lab had one about, I don't know, 1,000 feet from his house that was about to fire up. We went out there and I found, well, when I got 10 feet from the fence and I'm 20 feet from their big controllers in there, we could hear noise. When I got 20 feet, 30 feet away from the fence, it was gone. It decayed very rapidly with distance. The residential stuff is giving us problems. Solar Edge is one company for which we've received interference reports. We contacted them. So far, and this number needs to be updated, they have gone out and replaced in the field over 500 systems. They've gone off, taken the bad stuff off of houses, put new stuff up. At this point, the number of complaints is tapering down because the only time we're getting interference now is if somebody gets licensed and is a new operator right next to a solar neighbor with solar. Well, if it's an older system, they have interference. I mean, there's problems with filtering. They used to run these wires from the controllers out to the first panel, out to the second panel, out to the next one, out to the next one, forming a great big loop antenna on which noise was put. So, there were some issues. They're getting better. What I do want to do now is form an IEEE industry working group to develop a recommended practice for solar design and installation and how to respond to customer complaints. I talked to you a little bit about the battery charger. That's the one I had bought at Harbor Freight. We were all set to turn to the complaint, but Harbor Freight discontinued it, and I checked their new ones, and they were all okay. So, what are non-issues? Well, LED bulbs, compact fluorescent lights. I remember when the CFLs first came out, I read on QRZ.com, this is the end of amateur radio as we know it. It turns out not to be. I mean, I'm sure most of you have LED bulbs in your own house and you're continuing. Well, where can you go for information? Okay, first of all, our web page, we try to make that as complete as we can about RFI. Every single bit of information we have about RFI, even what we put into our books, the handbook, the antenna book, is also on the web page. Solving RFI is important for amateur radio. So any of the good articles we have not put them behind the members only wall. We want to make sure everybody has access to it. And that is a good resource. If you go to arrl.org/RFI, that'll redirect you right to the page. Well, okay, I'm not going to get into this much because this could go on and on for days. And I was told I couldn't talk for any more than 3 or 4 hours, so we'll try to speed this up a bit. Filters, you have a problem. You can filter noise at its source. I know DX Engineering, for example, does sell some nice AC line filters. You want to try those. They sell ferrite chokes, available in a number of other places as well. And people will say, "Well, Ed, what kind of product should I buy so I don't have noise?" Here's the problem: we don't get calls that say, "Ed, I'm not getting interference from my neighbor's equipment, and here's the model number." We only hear about the problems. Well, there's some things you can do, and what I'd say is, if you have a problem with RFI, you definitely want to work with us, work with a neighbor. We'll do what we can to get you through it. And of course, the RFI book. Well, okay, so you do have an interference problem. What do you want to do? First of all, we handle about 1,000 cases a year. So we have to be efficient. Sometimes some of the complainants, we'd like people, we have good information, read it before you call us. Some people want to call us so we can read it to them on the phone. And really, if you read all you can on our page about your interference and what the problem may be and solutions, when you do talk to us, things will be a lot more efficient and we'll get things done pretty quickly. Okay, so everybody calls me up. "Ed, I got this noise. What is it?" That's the wrong question. I mean, let's assume your noise. I say, "Oh yeah, that noise. I know all about it. It's caused by a Shutsu brand LED bulb." Oh, well, where is it? How do I find it? Where is it is the right question. Once you can locate the noise source, you can usually pin it down. Well, what if I tell you it's a Shutsu bulb, but some other device has a very similar noise? I send you off on a wild goose chase looking for nothing. And let me tell you, if you have noise from a neighbor and say, "Oh, it's your LED bulbs," and you replace all of those and it didn't fix his problem, he's mad now, and you're probably not going to get him to do much more to work with you. The real question: where is it? Go to find it. Well, what can you do? Okay, get a battery operated receiver, tune it to the frequency receiving interference, and then If you can hear that noise in your house on that battery operated receiver or connect it to your antenna, turn off your main breaker. If that noise goes away, it's you. And the number of times we hear from hams who say, oh, no, I don't have to do that. I know it's not in my house. We go round and round with them for 6 months, and it turns out they had a battery charger plugged in their garage they forgot all about. Do these steps. Okay, kill the main power, turn on the breakers one at a time. Note any change in noise. Then, if you do hear a note, okay, I turned on that breaker for that circuit. My noise went up for 6 dB, 10 dB. Turn it off and do the rest of them one at a time. That way, there, if you have multiple sources, you find it. When the noise is present, turn on those breakers. Now go into that part of the house and figure out what's plugged into that circuit. Almost all the time, you can relatively quickly find the noisy device. Don't skip these steps, please. We spend a lot of time working with amateurs who insist it's not them, and ultimately they're delayed by months, and we've spent a lot of staff time. Now, you're going to use a similar process if you work with your neighbor. Let's assume it's not you, and you find out it's coming from George's house next door. You're going to do the same thing in their house if you can talk them into this. Okay, more things you can do is check with your neighbors. You have a new noise showed up. What's new? What did they just buy? Again, the battery operated receiver with an S meter. This one you'll have to take out portable. Okay, place that receiver near the ground wire of nearby utility poles. You need an S meter, and what you'll find is whatever house is connected to that transformer, noise is coming down that ground wire. It'll be much louder there than it is at the pole in either direction. You might even need to do it, place this near the wiring of suspect houses if the nature of your neighborhood will allow that. I'll tell you right now, no trespassing. If you go off, we had one amateur went off into his neighbor's backyard with all sorts of equipment. She wasn't home. This got picked up on her security camera. And when the neighbor said to the FCC, hey, he came trespassing in my yard with all sorts of stuff, I'm afraid to work with him. FCC wouldn't back him. We really need to have it. Okay, well, contacting the neighbor, nobody really wants to do that. What happens when you first talk with that neighbor will set the tone for everything that follows. If you and the neighbor get off and start, accusing and pointing fingers, it's going to turn bad pretty quickly, lessening the likelihood that you'll get this done. Your neighbor doesn't understand this. You're telling the neighbor that one of those devices they just bought off at Wallet Depot is being operated in violation of some federal law they don't even understand. They'll say, well, what do you mean? Walmart wouldn't sell this if it was illegal. And so use what I call personal diplomacy. This person's your neighbor. This is the one who's going to watch your home if you're away on vacation. You're going to run into them at the neighborhood barbecue. And I usually start by talking to the neighbor about an interesting problem. George, we have an interesting problem, and I'd like you to help me if you can. Oh, what's up? That often goes pretty well. And then start by talking about FCC rules that apply to your station. He knows you're a ham. He sees the big antennas or even the wires in the trees. But you can also talk to him about noise can come from devices. And by the way, sometimes it represents an equipment failure in progress. Don't alarm them, but it's true. I mean, we've had cases of doorbell transformers and other things that there's internal arcing. So that's important. And stay neighborly. Look, if knowing all these technical solutions won't help you if the neighbor won't let you in the house to try them. Now, there are alternatives to personal diplomacy. And if you're not exercising good personal diplomacy and you tell the neighbor you want to apply a common mode choke to fix the problem, the neighbor could have a different kind of choke in mind. A little bit more neighborly advice. Uh, you know, you are not necessarily a provider of solutions, but a locator of solutions. But consider what you have invested in your station. We had one amateur, a big super station, a contest guy. He said he probably had $100,000 invested in his station. When along came a new housing development that put in noisy Class D amplifiers, he said, I'm going to go spend $1,000, buy new amplifiers, and pay the electrician to put them in. It was worth it to him. Well, you probably won't go that far, But if you have a neighbor and you can buy one filter and give it to the neighbor and solve your RFI problem, that's probably a practical solution for most hams. Don't modify your neighbor's equipment. If you do, you might, don't take the back off of that TV and put the filters inside because it works better. If you do that, when several years later that 25-year-old TV literally gives up the ghost, that's a pun. Your neighbors will say, and we'd like that new projection model, please. We want the big screen LED. So, and when you go out there, if you are working with a neighbor, don't sit there and say, well, we got to find out exactly what this is. Bring all the filters, put them on, get in and out of there as quickly as you can. After that, you can contact the league. You and the neighbor weren't able to work it out. You're not able to find the device. We might be able to help. The neighbor won't cooperate. We might be able to help. We might be able to get the FCC involved. And we'll try to do this. And then if that fails, when we turn this case over to the FCC, it's a well-documented case. Now, amateur radio, and this is kind of the other part of RFI, looking at solving problems before they occur. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Amateur radio has always been connected to the rest of technology. Industry contact is a way to do that. We work with IEEE, Consumer Electronic Manufacturers Association, a number of other entities, individual companies, and most important, I think, we're on industry standards committees. We work with the Society of Automotive Engineers. They're developing standards. ANSI C63 is the U.S. Standards Committee that writes industry standards adopted by the FCC by reference in its rules. I serve on that committee. I'm the chair of its subcommittee on immunity, so we have some pretty important roles. I served and I recently term limited out after 10 years on the EMC Society's board of directors. I was its elected vice president for standards. So we not only get seats at the table for these sorts of things, we get seats at the head of the table. We are bringing leadership to these. We're bringing the strength and value of amateur radio. And because we approach this realistically, we defend amateur radio. There's no doubt. But we do so in a realistic way that is productive and adds to the technology of the world, and it's recognized by industry. Um, so here's me. There's Ed Hare, Vice President for Standards. I'm currently no longer able to serve in that role. They have term limits, but I'm going to continue to work with their standards groups in any way I can. And this shows you just a few of the other companies we've done. One example of this, and I'm looking to do more, is we are now in IEEE ballot for a recommended practice that tells power companies how to respond to interference complaints. This is going to become an industry standard. So all of those processes I described will now be something standardized, hopefully even picked up perhaps internationally. Now, I'm pretty close to the end here, so those of you who've fallen asleep with your head tipped forward can think about waking up now. But people do ask, Ed, whatever happened to BPL? I mean, that was a big deal. Some of you longer term hams remember that from, about 10 years ago. Well, the good news is Access BPL, those that try to use those overhead power lines as conductors, is gone. It's just not a viable technology. It didn't work. Utilities were afraid of it because they knew if they put in a BPL system and it wasn't completely legal, Ed would show up. I didn't have a last name in that industry. And so at this point, there is some in-premise BPL using building wiring, but we ended up getting all of the companies doing that to not use the amateur bands. That got picked up internationally and became part of the ITU standards. So I like to say we lost every battle, but we won the war. Other stuff we've done, arc fault circuit breakers. We had a problem with 5 watts of transmit power tripping neighbors' arc fault circuit interrupters. We built this text fixture. We put in one of each type we could find. We found one model of the Eaton Corporation was tripping with 5 watts of power from W1AW. We contacted them. They put 2 engineers on a plane. They saw the problem. They said, this is not good. They went back, and 6 weeks later, they had a redesigned product. So I promised you a horrible joke, so I'll give you one. We cleaned the lab for the ARRL Centennial event. And what happened is, way in the back corner, the guys found this dusty old bottle Well, they brought it to me and said, Ed, you've been here forever. You know what this is. I said, I've never seen it. So I took a rag and I wiped off the label. The cork popped open and a genie comes out. No, no, true story. So the genie says, well, you found me and saved me from 50,000 years of oblivion. You get 3 wishes, but we have new rules in Genie Land. Whatever you wish for, your worst enemy gets twice as much. And I'm saying, oh, that BPL guy, I hate him, but I'm greedy. I got to have my wishes. So what would you like for your first wish? And I said, I want $1,000,000. And poof, $1,000,000 appeared at my feet. Simultaneously across the country, $2,000,000 appeared at his feet, and he was sitting there throwing the money up, happy as can be. Genie says, what do you want for your second wish? And I said, I want a 100-room mansion on the hill. Poof, I'm in the 100-room mansion. Simultaneously, poof, he's in a 200-room mansion holding the deed, wondering what he did to deserve all this good fortune. Genie says, so what would you like for your third wish? And I thought about it for a second and I said, beat me half to death. So that's my horrible joke. I'm not hearing any laughter. Great. Great indeed. Yep. So at any rate, this ends my formal presentation, and I'll entertain any questions, or if not, you guys can go back and have the rest of your social meeting. But it's been a pleasure. I'm glad to come here. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I'm a little more lively in person, I think, than I am on Zoom, but we gave it a go.
Can you hear us here in the room a little bit better now? Are we still picking up?
Okay, well, I'm not hearing a lot of questions, so then I think I will wrap it up. And thank you for having me. And I look forward to the next time. Maybe I can get back out there
now.
What's that?
I was just going to say, can you hear us now?
Yeah, I'm hearing you much better now. Yes.
Well, hang on a second. We're trying to work out some technical things. For some reason, the mic's not coming over to you. So I've got it going through another computer here. But we do have some questions in the room.
Okay, good. Yeah, and by the way, this is much more clear. Whatever you were using for that other microphone was really breaking up pretty badly.
But we're using a wireless mic talking to the people in the room, and I'm actually just talking at a laptop here. So yeah, I'm not sure how I'm going to get this to other people. I will relay questions to you. We'll be a relay station.
Perfect. That would be perfect for the American Radio Relay League.
Have you got a question? The question was about new electric cars and AM radio, that they don't have an AM radio in it, or is it because they're radiating too much energy, or is it just they don't feel they need AM radios anymore?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, I've heard reports from both directions. The automotive engineers I've talked with, I mean, I know a number of them from these industry committees, kind of lean toward the latter story, but we know that a lot of these are really making noise. I'm not horribly worried so much about the electric vehicles. I mean, amateurs can buy one or not. Although ultimately we're looking at more and more interest in EVs, and perhaps ultimately even the old gasoline engines will become legacy. What I am worried about is wireless power transfer. The industry is looking to do electric vehicle charging without wires. They want people to drive their car over a little coil in the floor of their basement that will transfer power up to that car. They are talking 20 kilowatt charging devices to charge that car overnight. Now, if you can imagine a switching mode power supply, which is what these are, running at 20,000 watts, you realize that the potential for interference is pretty high. To do that, they're looking at operating at around 100 kilohertz. They're going to need a new FCC rule that makes that an industrial, scientific, and medical frequency. But we're tremendously worried. The AM broadcasters are worried. A lot of the other work going on in Europe, RSGB is doing some yeoman's work. So, we're trying to get plugged into that. We're waiting for some of the first tests in the United States. When they show up, I'm taking a load of test equipment out anywhere in the country. Drive there, fly there, I don't care. And we're going to look at the electric vehicles.
Yeah, I can imagine that one. That one always scares me. And I imagine all the neighborhood cats in the winter will want to lay around it and get nice and warm as well.
Well, it works fairly well if you're aligned and to know, the coils are lined up, and to know how well that's going to work, go to any parking lot and notice how well the cars are lined up to those white lines. You know where this is going.
I've got no other questions in the room. Are there any questions online?
WC30 here.
Yep, hear you loud and clear.
All right, Ed, very good. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your excellent presentation. And I have great respect for what the ARRL does with RFI. I have a story that I won't bore you with, but they were spectacular.
In fact, I think I recognize your call from some of the exchanges I've had with the lab guys.
Yeah, don't pay any attention to what the police say.
Yeah. Wait, are you the guy who went into the neighbor's backyard?
Yeah, it was. I wore a hat. No, first of all, we were wondering if the slides are available for your presentation.
Yeah, I can email them to you. I don't know. I guess I'll send them to Tim unless somebody else has a better idea.
We can get them to you.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And we have a tongue-in-cheek demand for you. Open headquarters back up again. We've been up there to visit you multiple times on the train, and we really enjoyed our visit up at headquarters. And we're up at Skyview Radio Society, by the way, and we were the last tour before things shut down for COVID. They were kind of giving us the stink eye and said, "Hey, get out of here." So we'd love to be the first one to come back up again. So there's a market for having headquarters back up again.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir here. We're partly open. We do allow visitors to come to the lobby and buy stuff. We also allow visitors to go. Yeah, exactly. But we allow them to go to W1AW and operate. The rest of the building is still not open to visitors. I'm very disappointed in a lot of ways, personally as well. I'd love to see the lab open again. Look, if people are going to come to headquarters and they were going to see only two things, it would be W1AW and the lab. And, I think part of it is inertia. Part of it is some of the staff are still very COVID shy. We have a few of them that even though we no longer have a masking mandate, there is a few that run around masked all the time. That's fine. That's their business. But what I might suggest is those who would like to see that change might take that up with their division director and see what the ultimate plans are going to be for that. I don't imagine they'll be sending tours, to see people slaving in their offices on computers. That's kind of boring. But I think a little bit more than what we're doing. I'd love to see the lab open up. We have the new W1HQ station. That's a real showpiece. You'll be seeing a lot of video on that stuff. I think I'd like people to be able to see it in person. But right now, it is what it is.
Okay.
But thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, if you don't mind, throw that around when you get back to headquarters there.
I will, and I might suggest that those, as I put it to all amateurs, make your views known to your ARRL division director on all matters, not just this one, but all matters.
Okay. Well, like I said, I greatly respect the work that you folks do. I know you don't get appreciated very much, but I know you're working in the background in intelligent ways.
Well, actually, for the most part, we do get appreciated. You wouldn't always know that from looking at, say, my ARRL voice or QRZ sometimes. But no, a lot of people recognize that, the league is doing some pretty important things. And it's stuff like product testing, stuff like RFI. I think the work we do is world class, literally. Other areas we could perhaps do a little better job, but we're working on that too.
Okay, and I'm going to spin the camera around the room here so everybody can wave and go, hello, Marty.
Oh yeah, there's all the waves. Yay. Okay, wait, no, spin the camera. We can say, okay, how many people have, no, spin it around again.
Okay.
I want to see how many hands for people who say they've had an interference problem with noise to their station.
That's pert near everybody.
Exactly. As the rest of you guys get on the air. So, okay, on that, I'm going to wrap it up before I get any more trouble.
Okay.
Again, thanks for having me, and have a good rest of your meeting.
Thanks for the Mercer Club for hosting this.
Yep.
Hey, Ed, we really want to thank you. We're sorry Tim couldn't be here. Really appreciate the talk. And I'll tell you, I've seen your presentation a couple of times, and every time there's more information that I pick up and things to learn and try. So it's good. You're keeping it fresh. You're keeping it updated. And it's great to see it. So thank you.
Well, that's because I don't remember what I said last time. What can I tell you? And by the way, Tim is in trouble though, because I as I said, I can't accept all of these invitations. But because it was Tim, I did. And here I arranged to stay late at night. I mean, it's going to be what, 9 o'clock by the time I get home. And Tim's not even here. Something about didn't feel well. I don't know.
Well,
you guys could take care of that for me quietly. Take them out back and give them a little man-to-man talking to, if you know what I mean.
Will do.
Okay, well, at any rate, you all have a good night. We'll see you later.
73, thank you guys.
Yep, bye.